How's it going there, everybody? Brandon here, coming to you in my studio and gallery today. I have another quick video for you. This one, something new for me, first time painting on a piece of wood. This one is a white-tailed deer on a slab of wood here, so if you want to follow along with this process, let's take a look. Alright, so what I'm going to be working on here today, this is just a cross section of a piece of wood. Still got some of the bark on the edges there that I picked up at a local craft store, so I have not painted on one of these yet. So we're going to see how the paint behaves when we put it on there, and we'll probably have to put a layer in there and let it dry and make sure it looks the way we want. I don't know if it'll absorb into the wood or not, you know, to any degree and affect the way it looks, but we're going to find out. And I'm going to be painting a white-tailed deer on here, and I'm going to probably block in the deer itself first, just so I don't lose. I've got my little pencil sketch in there, especially these antlers and things, because this is a very specific deer. Actually, it's one that my dad got when I was a kid that I'm going to be painting for him. So I want to make sure I get all that correct. So I'm going to block that in first with just some dark tones of brown, and then come back and lay my background in around it once I've kind of got my deer blocked in, just so I don't lose my details. So I'm going to start with a fairly small brush here to get into these small spaces, and I'm going to just go right into some raw umber to start out with and draw in these antlers that are coming up. And this is certainly nothing fancy going on here at all. This is just going straight into raw umber and basically painting in the lines of these antlers. This darker brown color is just going to provide a good base for me to come back in towards the end of this painting process and add highlights over the top of it that'll be visible. So I can already tell that this surface is obviously not nearly as textured as the canvases I'm normally working on, but having said that, it still does take the paint pretty well. It comes off the brush, and I think it must be absorbing it to a certain degree, because for a lack of putting it a better way, it seems very dry painting on this wood, and it soaks the paint off the brush relatively well. So I'm going to keep blocking in now down the body of this deer and let that continue to dry up there to see ultimately how it turns out, to see if it's going to require me putting some more paint in, another coat in there, or what, or how that's going to turn out. So I'm just keep blocking in now down here on the body of this deer, and I'm going to adjust my tones a little bit into the lighter areas of brown here, so I can know where my shading is going to be, and you know where the white areas and the lighter areas are going to be on the body. I'll switch over to a little 1/2-inch angle brush here to start working on the body and bring in my darkest browns along this right edge, I think. This process of blocking in the body here on the fur is really just mostly, again, going into raw umber, starting on that right side here. Now I'm going into a little bit of titanium white, just a touch of yellow ochre, lightening things up a little bit around this neck. And I basically just have to have enough of a contrast in these colors here to be able to see the shape and the form of the deer. Moving into some grays here, basically white with a touch of black in it to gray out the areas that are going to be white in the end. So right there under the chin and neck, around the eye, moving into black here for the nose, around the mouth, and then the eyeball itself. Back into pretty much straight raw umber for the bridge of the nose here, and then the tops of these ears. And then I just kind of lighten up that brown value a little bit to fade that down on the face. and to finish off the rest of the ears. And again, I'll put in a gray value of some white with some black into it, any of the areas that ultimately will be a brighter white on the finished product. We want that white to be able to show. So I'm putting in that gray value here in the inner parts of the ears initially, and around the mouth. And that's really about all I need to do for a blocking in layer. Well, now that I've got my initial blocking in layer done here, I have actually decided that I'm going to leave the natural wood grain and everything as is and not do a background. So I guess that's artistic license for us. We can make a decision halfway through something and change our mind. So I was going to lay a background in back there, but I think in this instance I'm just going to keep it as is and leave that natural. And so now I'm just going to come in here and start detailing the deer out. And I'm going to start back again here with my 1/2" little angled shader brush here and just start working on the colorations of the fur a little bit, and getting most of the coloration correct, and then I'll worry about putting in little fine fur details as the last thing that I ended up doing. So I'm going to come in here and start working with some raw umber and some titanium white, maybe a touch of yellow ochre, a little bit of black to kind of gray things down a little bit, and see if I can't get the fur color exactly the way I want it. After the first initial blocking in layer, and given that time is now to dry, basically just coming back in and layering over it again with the same colors, coming back in with raw umber and just lightening it up in areas with a little bit of titanium white, maybe a touch of yellow ochre in the mix. Again, just to kind of create the shaded areas and highlights where they needed to be. So working back and forth here with these values to create multiple layers just kind of adds a realism to the fur. And then you just kind of create the shaded looks of moving from dark to light in certain areas, like from that bridge of the nose, top of the head's a little darker, and then it lightens up as it moves down the face. And then I keep the body pretty dark here on this righter edge, as the body's kind of moving off of the wood here in terms of the view of it, and then lightening it up on that front of the neck to create a contrast with that, so we can see the form of the body itself. And then down here where the chest of the deer would start is got where some of that whiter hair comes into play. So basically just keeping that area with the gray tones. We'll put in some white highlights at the very last bit of detailing that we do. Making a few different passes here of darkening areas that I want to darken and lightening areas that I want to lighten. That chin right there, darkening up a little bit of the gray right underneath the chin itself to darken that part out. Switching back over to a smaller brush now to start doing a little bit more finer detail work in here around these ears and the face. Just so I can get into these spaces a little bit better. Just clean up some of these lines. And now, having moved to some smaller brushes here, I'm just getting into these areas and detailing things out a little bit, and like I said, cleaning up a little bit of the edges and lines a little bit, brightening up some of the white areas around the eye and around here on the chin and the nose, and then also going to be moving into the areas around the ears, brightening some of that white up where we would be seeing more light catching some of that. Just remember, if you're painting something like this, similar painting along, that you definitely don't want to kill all your dark areas. You got to have contrast between those lights and darks for it to look realistic and you know, a little more three-dimensional, so to speak. Trying to just detail around the nose and the mouth here, putting a little bit of the brightest white highlights on the front corners, front edges, leading edges. Now a little bit of the whiter highlights down there in the body fur, a little brighter white along those outer edges of the ears, right around the eye itself. Creating the eyeball is basically just putting a little bit of a blue and gray mixture for a little sheen on the eye in there, and then maybe a little tiny touch of white to put the little reflection on the eyeball itself. Now a liner brush here, trying to add a little bit of fur detail. It's a little bit difficult on this wood compared to doing on a canvas. The wood just kind of sucks up that color, it seems like, and dries it off your brush really fast. So I had to kind of keep going back into some water here to get some moisture back in the paint. And now detailing out these antlers. Mostly going into some yellow ochre, a little bit of white, a touch of brown and red here at the base to create those little gnarly areas on the bone at the base of these antlers, just basically touching little highlights in there. And then more of the yellow ochre and white mix, a little bit of raw umber still in it, so it's not overly bright to start putting a highlight on the bone. For my last little bit of detailing, I'm going to move to a little 10-aught spotter brush here, a little fine point tip on it, and do my last bit of detailing around the antlers and the nose and the mouth, eyes, maybe a little bit of fur detail thrown in there as well, and then it will be a finished product. And the last but not least step here again is just using one of the smallest brushes I've got and just touching in the lightest bits of highlights on these areas. So touching in the lightest colors that I'm using along these antlers, the brightest of the white and yellow ochre mix, touching in areas that would be catching more light, creating that little, again, that gnarly look along the bone and the base of those antlers. And then just putting in the top edges of what would be catching the most light with my brightest colors. Alright, so that is what I'm calling a finished product of the white-tailed deer here painted on this piece of wood. Hope you guys had fun following along with that one. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.